Anyways, yesterday, guys, we covered the Reddits, and surprisingly, what was supposed to be a 45-minute podcast turned into like a 3-hour podcast. Covered a couple different things on the Reddits. One thing in particular that we covered yesterday that it's already unpinned from Fortnite is the discussion of out-of-order packets. Surprisingly, the upcoming audio improvements are still here, but out-of-order packets are gone now. It is sort of interesting. Let's see if I can find it. Anyways, I tried. We're gonna kind of go in order here. This is what it was. It was packet reordering by the lead network engineer, lead networking programmer, Ryan Gerlach at Epic. And what he mentioned was they identified issues with certain ISPs that were causing packets to arrive out of order. And what the game does when a packet arrives out of order is it basically gets rid of it. Used to. They changed this, which is what they're describing now. But basically, if the packet arrived, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4 packets, and it arrives 1, 2, 4, 3, it just gets rid of packet 3, but it doesn't treat packet 3 as packet loss, so you never actually see that you basically have packet loss. Yeah, it's kind of a big deal. This is kind of actually a big deal. So basically, you have packet loss in a video game. I've known about out-of-order packets for quite a while. I did not put 2 and 2 together. I did not think games had problems with out-of-order packets. I thought that was a pretty rare thing. But given the nature of the internet, it's actually not that uncommon to have out-of-order packets just because of the way the internet works, because it's just a bunch of different tubes all hooked together through routers trying to get to a location. So, in Fortnite, for instance, you have some ISPs that are delivering packets as they get out of order. And now the game will rearrange the packets. However, in order for a game to rearrange packets, it needs to buffer the packets. And in order to buffer the packets, that introduces latency. And once again, it's not an infinite buffer, meaning if packets arrive further and further out of sync with each other, if the packets arrive further and further out of sync with each other, eventually... So packets, by the way, if you don't know what packets are, basically your data, if you have a tick on the server, everything when it goes through the internet ends up in packets. It goes back and forth in packets. It's like mail. Only really, really, really fast mail in a stream of packets. It's packet mail, I guess. Anyways, those packets, depending on how fast they get there, which is latency, the number of them is generally bandwidth, although it doesn't need to be because you can have packets of varying sizes. That influences bandwidth as well, throughput. But the packets can, depending on the routes they take, they usually almost always will take the same route, but they sometimes don't, and sometimes they're delayed by different things. And then when they arrive, they show up at different time intervals. And at different time intervals, it really, really matters to two different things. Anything that is real time. One is gaming, as you guys know, which is what this is about. This is Epic for Unreal 4 engine. This is for gaming in general. And the other one is for VoIP, for voice over IP. So voice over IP, if you have buffering to prevent out-of-order packets, so you always have things that arrive on time, that leads to desync in the conversation, stuttering. Well, not stuttering, it'll lead to basically a conversation that sounds very disconnected, because when you say something and when they say something, conversations are very, very synchronized with people. You don't realize it until you introduce a delay. But it really, really fucks up your ability to talk with people when there is a delay in your conversation. In the opposite direction, if there's too much packet fragmentation, they just drop packets, and that leads to, you know, like garbled sounds, lead to someone basically sounding unintelligible. General, like, so basically it just garbles the transmission. It sounds, it's like an analog station, you know, when the static appears. Only it's not static, it's digital static, so it's like blocky. Static is still static even when you have digital, but it's more of just you don't have parts of your screen sort of thing, rather than the whole picture staticky screen. Just another form of static. Another kind of static. It's the same thing. With this year, though, for instance, I have a fucking, like, hair on my finger. I can't. Oh, I got frostbite. Anyways, there's with video games, packets really important that packets arrive on time and latency, and also arrive in order, so you can just feed it to the simulation. And it's the same as with voice over IP, which I just described. If you add more delay, it'll split up the simulation more and more and more, and then things become more and more out of sync with each other, and that leads to desync, or also just increases the latency, but basically it manifests itself as desync, which can lead to hit registration issues. It can lead to all sorts of fucked up shit. But even then, even if you have a bigger buffer, that does not guarantee that you still aren't going to have essentially packet loss. This is kind of a big deal, because this guy here does not describe it as packet loss, but in other articles that I've read that basically discuss voice over IP and reorganized packets, which I've been doing a little bit of research, it is definitely packet loss, because if it arrives too late, the simulation discards the packet because it can't use it anymore because the data's too old, and then it skips a packet, basically. It skips it. It's packet loss. It is 100% packet loss. This guy does not describe it as packet loss, but it is very much packet loss. And this sounds like something where they've known about it for a while, they just haven't talked about it. So as such, the community basically is the last to know about this, and it's right when they're basically about to implement a possible solution to it. But anyways, I described yesterday, we talked about this a little bit more in depth yesterday. We talked about comparison with early versions of Crossfire for AMD, and how sometimes it would deliver frames with Crossfire that were out of order, and basically it would count them as your FPS, like an actual, like, it counted as like another frame that was rendered properly, even though it wasn't it just discards it. It eventually, like, it first started out with the frames sometimes flip-flopping each other, and then it'd still render it, and then it just stopped, like, displaying them out of order. It just wouldn't display the out of order frames, it'd just drop them. But it'd still consider it part of the FPS, so you'd still get an FPS boost, but not really. Like, it's one of those weird fucking metrics where it looks like it's better than it's actually currently doing. So anyways, here with out of order packets, guys, out of order packets, the problem here is this is basically packet loss. This whole thing is packet loss, but the game has never told you that it lost packets, so you've never known that you essentially, and it's not just Fortnite, it's not just Unreal Engine, all games will have problems with out-of-order packets, and depending on how they deal with them, which depends on the engine and depends on the netcode, even within games on the same engine, sometimes they implement the netcode differently, they change things around. Depending on how they do it will determine how well it actually deals with out-of-order packets. Now, this year, basically, they've described, it's kind of weird because the first thing I've done, guys, the first thing I did after I heard about this was go, oh yeah, that sounds familiar, because I have taken telecommunication classes, and out-of-order packets deals with TCP/IP, meaning TCP/IP was instituted to help deal with out-of-order packets. However, TCP/IP has problems with incurring latency, although there are some first-person shooters that use TCP/IP. Incurring latency, and there's downsides to using TCP/IP in general, which is why almost every first-person shooter uses UDP. However, TCP/IP has packet ordering in place where it will make sure that the packets arrive in a certain order, and if they don't, it'll ask for a packet again. But if it asks for a packet again, basically, when this packet's sitting here and TCP/IP goes, oh, there's supposed to be a packet here, I'm gonna fucking ask this guy for a packet again. This makes another round trip to the server back to you. So basically, it like doubles your latency while you're basically waiting for this packet that's already, basically it doesn't work. It wouldn't work at all in a real-time setting. You can't do it because you just have to drop it and move on. It'd be like, you know, like having your just like your frame just freeze and then it'd go again, but it doesn't, because everything needs to be in sync with reality and needs to be in sync with real time. Whereas you can buffer like a video if it's running slow. You can't buffer video games in the same way, because eventually you reach a point where it affects fluidity of the game. It affects the simulation, it affects the ability for people to actually play the game and have a meaningful experience in the game itself. So I started asking around. First place I went is the most anal retentive place in the world, which is the networking forum on Reddit, and asked some people there about some tools for detecting out-of-order packets. They basically just said use a Wireshark, which I've known about already, but I really, really do not want to dig through packets. I was hoping there's a tool available, but it doesn't actually sound like there are tools available for it. Yeah, like they just said use Wireshark. That's basically what it comes down to. Yeah. Not exactly. But like with voice over IP, I expected there to be like corporate. All this stuff is very new, guys. You don't realize how new shit is. Everyone thinks everything is just paved over and the world's this fucking happy-go-lucky place, especially with technology, and it's not. So like with, even in the most anal retentive place in the world, they don't even have a tool for dealing with this. You just have to inspect packets on an application and computer, like each individual computer you'd have to load up a Wireshark on just to test whether or not a certain connection is having problems. It's really, really weird. So basically there aren't any tools for voice over IP for figuring this out. There's tools for detecting jitter, which is the variance in ping. There's tools for, obviously, for ping, which is how long it takes you to get point A to point B. You know, there's bandwidth tools, but there isn't really anything for out-of-order packets, which very much is like out-of-order packets isn't something particular to loading web pages. It is particular to specifically, where it matters a lot is specifically to real-time applications. And the two big real-time applications, which we discussed already, the two real big applications is gaming and voice over IP. And voice over IP is what the rest of the world takes seriously because it's used in the corporate world. Gaming is still this kind of foray with all this new shit going on. But anyways, first thing I did on was turn on the goggles. You know, I turned on the Googles and Googled this shit, and after last night, because it started to make me think about this. We tweeted at Reddit, or not at Reddit, at Fortnite and at Epic, which I'm sure they didn't fucking read, about them. You know, they should consider making their own gaming protocol that takes into account things like this. There isn't a gaming protocol available, and it sounds very generic, but you can call it whatever you want. GCP, you know. GDP, you know, whatever. That's actually, you know, that probably wouldn't work very well. Anyways, like, you could come up with all these different names. It really doesn't matter, but the idea is still the same, which is that you're having communication breakdown, and it's packet loss. Packet loss is really, really bad. Everyone in gaming knows packet loss is really, really fucking bad, because what that means is you get stutters. You get these periods of communication where you just aren't communicating properly, and out-of-order packeting is packet loss. This is packet loss, which is very, very, very bad in gaming. Very, very bad, because it interrupts the simulation. Only it's not basically on, like, you're not losing hundreds of packets, they're just disappearing. You're basically getting, like, it's like having, instead of stuttering, it's like having micro-stuttering. So instead of your simulation being this nice fluid chain of events and just being chopped up, which would be normal packet loss, or it's just missing, you know, like a couple, like 100 packets or something, you know, they just disappear into the nether, and your game freezes, and then, you know, rockets forward, right? That's normal packet loss. Or artificial land, see where people are using an old-fashioned leg switch, they got a button tied to their Ethernet cord, you know, shit like that. You know, putting that aside, that is normal packet loss, but micro packet loss is basically these gaps in the simulation, which then the netcode tries to cover up with things like, you know, movement prediction and interpolation, where it tries to predict where you're going, and the simulation tries to basically move people to these areas, and the people may not actually be in that position, so when you actually shoot at the position, you might just hit nothing but air. And the compensation for when you can shoot this kind of ghost, and when it'll register on someone, there are mechanics in place where it won't always take into account your shots. So you might shoot, and like I said, you'll just hit air even though you're shooting at a person, which I have a lot of fucking problems with. Like we were talking about yesterday, how there aren't metrics. This is before we read the Reddit post, how there sometimes aren't metrics for things you are experiencing, and you need to look for metrics for these things to describe in a meaningful way, in a quantitative, meaningful way, what's going on. And there isn't always stuff available to do this. And this is one of the cases. So this guy is describing how they're attempting to fix out of order packets, but at the same time, like, they didn't even talk about it, they didn't acknowledge it, and there's still no metrics in the game for detecting this. And this isn't something that's just particular to Team Fortress, or not Team Fortress 2, Fortnite. I don't know why I came up with Team Fortress 2. This isn't something particular to Fortnite. This is for all games in existence, and how well or how bad the game deals with out of order packets very, very much is part of netcode, which is why you can't just test the ping and the desync like Battle Nonsense does and then go, oh, this is all working all right, you know, it looks like he's a certain amount of distance behind, you know, and oh, this guy shot you around the corner, high pings are bad, you know, sort of thing. There's a lot of things that actually go into this, and it's all about how it's very, very complex. It's all about how it puts together. It's just a bunch of like fucking band-aids holding hands, trying to keep your and the guy, you know, thousands of miles away from you together in the same fucking server, trying to kill each other. And it's something that's actually pretty difficult. Anyways, going back to this, there aren't any tools in place to actually measure this. I looked for tools for, like, this doesn't need to be particular to Fortnite. They can make a tool for this. I'm surprised no one has made a tool, and I really wish, like, I knew people that actually coded this shit, but you don't, like, people to tweet at, but you don't. There isn't really anyone. I mean, I guess Cloud Harmony, maybe? I don't know. I really don't know. I wonder if Cloud Harmony actually, because they actually do like metrics for benchmarking. Cloud Harmony, which I use sometimes and showcase on my stream. I don't know if they'd actually do anything. Twitter. Good for them. Last active retweet was May 23rd, 2018. Maybe they go in spurts. Oh, maybe they're a little bit active. Let's look at their replies. May 23rd, 2018. Well, that kind of sucks. Scorecards for AWS. Blogs, Gartner. I'm a client. Yeah. Of $10,000s of dollars. This looks like it's a bust. There aren't many websites online that actually do what we are talking about right now. Like like they have metrics specific for. This guy only tests latency. He doesn't even check like jitter, for instance. Jitter, despite it being very important, almost no one tests jitter. Whatever reason. That's kind of a weird thing. The other thing I could think of is maybe DSL reports are user friendly. Like there's some places on the internet you go and people just don't want any of your shit. They don't want to hear anything about what you're doing or what you're trying to do. This, even though there's a guy here you can contact, like basic latency measurement. DSL reports might work. This doesn't look like it is. The thing about this website is it basically compares a bunch of different cloud service providers, which is what AWS is, which is what Fortnite uses. A lot of people use cloud service providers. Apex Legends uses cloud service providers as well. So for something like this, like they basically test metrics for service providers, but they also don't. That's just a like button. Social media is dead, guys. I bet Google Plus still works. There's plenty of people that use Google Plus. Use Facebook? No. January 7th, 2018. Yeah. Anyways, the idea here being you can talk to someone and maybe possibly they would actually see the need to integrate something like this in services. No one does this because this really does. So there's very, like I mentioned, there's very specialized parts of the internet, and low latency, near real time stuff is not really like you want web pages to load, but that's not real time. You know, if it's delayed slightly, you'll go, oh, that kind of sucks, but it's not imperative to what you're doing. Like VoIP and like even videos like you guys are watching, you know, they have a buffer built in. So like it really doesn't even matter that much. It doesn't even matter that much with videos, you know. It's like the only thing that really matters is live streaming. Well, not live streaming. Live streaming even you can add seconds to it and people really want. It's VoIP and gaming are the two big things. Gaming's on a millisecond level, right? You know, you're talking about a ping. You know, 100 milliseconds is pretty high for a ping, right? If that's 100 milliseconds, that's a tenth of a second. And then you go down to like 50, and I'm having 40 ms on Fortnite and having problems with that. But that's on like a sub-millisecond level, and that's very close to what you have working, what you're working with voice over IP. So if you add a couple, you know, you could add a couple extra packets in there, that can add quite a few milliseconds onto your communication. If you're buffering in order to reorder the packets, that can actually add quite a bit to your ping. And games don't show you this additional latency, whatever it adds on with a buffer, for instance, which they're talking about doing, which is what this post is about, by the way. They didn't know about this until they actually talked about this, and Ryan Gerliev actually opened the floodgates on this because, like, a lot of people don't actually understand what's going on here. Like I mentioned, like, we're talking about cheating. Like, even, for instance, people won't really think people cheat. They won't really understand what cheats look like in video games, for instance. They'll just understand that they aren't having fun and they aren't getting as many kills as they probably think they should be, and they'll move on to something where they can perform near what they expect their level of performance to be. And the more convoluted the game, the worse the game makes it for you in multiple different ways, in netcode or, you know, with hit registration or cheating. Determines kind of like a lot to do with how you feel about the fairness, your autonomy in the game, how you feel you can change the game. And if the two don't match up, it really starts to weigh down on people, especially if they take games. But they'll just move on. But anyways, here, like he's talking about basically adding a buffer. He doesn't say buffer. He doesn't say a lot of things here. You basically have to know what he's talking about to know that he's basically talking about a buffer here. Discarding packets here is generally okay because we have a mechanism to retransmit packets if needed, but the retransmission takes time, so in effect it causes increased latency for whatever actions would have been triggered by processing that packet. Retransmission, he's talking about TCP/IP. However, the game did receive every packet the sender sent it, and technically it could have processed packet number 2, so dropping it might seem wasteful, and it is. If the out-of-order packet is received on the same game frame, we should be able to sort them and correct them order before fully processing them, considered a revised loop. So game frame, assuming is FPS, that's very low. You could be talking about 1 tick from the server. They have 60 tick servers, which would once again that's a lot higher, like 60 FPS. So 60 tick would be about 16 seconds. So basically, they're talking about a 16 millisecond window in which they can read. But if they decide to buffer it, which they definitely sound like they're doing, that adds latency. But this is weird. It basically sounds like they're using 1 tick. They're buffering it by 1 tick, so they're adding an additional 16 ms to all players. Or maybe this might be adaptive. It might only affect people with a lot of out of order packets. They don't really tell you exactly what's going on here. This is very, very basic what's going on. Trying to transmit all the packets we received in the example above without discarding any of the pain and paying for the retransmission, which is like TCP/IP, of whatever packet number 2 contained. Normally, it just drops the packets, and someone else actually talked about exactly the same thing that I'm talking about in the comments below, which we covered yesterday. Basically, they're talking about buffering this so then they can reorder it. You can't reorder without a buffer. It's impossible. You have to, if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, there has to be a time delay between when you received one and when you reorder, you know, the packets that are out of place. So if you have 1, 2, 3, 4, and then you have 8, 6, 7, then you have to at least wait for the duration between 6 and 7. However, the buffer will probably be much longer than that, just to take as a generic maintain consistency, just a generic buffer that's just static. It'll always be the same size unless it adapts a little bit, but not. I don't think that it'll adapt basically frame by frame. But having something like that, and even then, if you have consistency where your ping constantly oscillates up and down, that also can ruin things for people. As you guys know, if you've had, way back in the day, OBS had problems with ping oscillations, like 3 or 4 years ago. I had problems with ping oscillations. At least my internet connection did, where when I'd stream, my ping would oscillate up and down, and it still kind of does. It's not as bad as it used to be. Like you can see it here, for instance, going up and down. This isn't very bad though. This is 40 ms, and this is 35 right here. This isn't horrible. Basically, streaming adds an additional 2 ms to my average ping, and you can see the oscillations here. Back when I used to stream, it'd go up and down by about between 40 ms and 90 ms. So big swings. And of course, that just absolutely ruins your performance in games. Yeah, basically here he's talking about a buffer. He doesn't actually talk about any of the stuff that he's suggesting. He just vaguely mentions. So basically, they have out-of-order packets. Essentially, it just dropped the packets before, which is packet loss. And he's talking about retransmission. Games don't wait for retransmission. They just drop a packet. Which he's trying to avoid saying that they don't retransmit. They just drop packets because that's what they do. Why would they? Because if you have to transmit a packet, you basically have to add an additional... Like, if there's huge amounts of packet loss, you always have to retransmit. That's just because you have to resync the game. But if it's missing, like, one packet, the game engine just makes up for that by just skipping it. It just skips the locations, and essentially you have a gap here, which is packet loss. And he doesn't describe that, because basically, if you have, like, 1, 2, 3, and then it goes 5 and 4, and then it goes, oh, 4 is missing, let's retransmit it, you know, then it stops, and it has to go from you to the server, and then from the server back to you. That's how retransmission works. And games don't do that because that's one of the reasons they use UDP and not TCP/IP, and why you can't constantly do like retransmissions, because it's very costly and it's not something you can actually do in real time. Well, that's a good question. That's why I'm just making vague statements about it, because it's impossible to tell from what he's talking about. He basically said a game frame. And a game frame could be your FPS, which I doubt. I'm guessing he's referencing a tick rate on the server, which I mentioned already, which is 1 tick, which is 60 tick rate, which is 16 ms, which I already mentioned. So possibly, so basically they're buffering the packet. It might just be for people with retransmission problems, or not with out-of-order packet problems, where they buffer out-of-order packets by 1 frame, or 1 tick on the server, which means it increases your latency by 16 ms roughly. If it buffers for 1 frame, 1 tick, it's going to wait for that. If it says yeah, like he says there's mechanism to retransmit packets if needed. That's like TCP/IP stuff, But they don't do that. No game does that because you have to wait for the packet to come back and you have to tell the game that you're missing the packet in the first place. So there really isn't a retransmission in place. Unless your game basically suffers a massive packet loss and has to resync where you know where your character sticks in place and then you warp forward. Any sort of warping usually has to do with packet loss. Out-of-order packets are received on the same game frame. We should be able to sort them by correct order. Basically, waiting one game frame is the buffer, is if you have to parse this out. One game frame is the buffer. So basically 16 ms is how long you need to wait. And that might just be for people with out-of-order packets. How do you tell if you're someone with out-of-order packets? The game doesn't tell you. How do you tell when you have lots of out-of-order packets? The game doesn't tell you. How do you know if this buffer is working on you and not someone else? Well, maybe there will be something in place, but I kind of doubt it considering the net graph is still broken in the game. So, basically here he's just basically saying that they're now going to start buffering. They've decided that waiting or buffering packets is a better answer than basically packet loss. This is essentially what's going on here. They've decided that buffering is a better idea than packet losses, which it probably is. However, guys, as I mentioned, guys, the first things I did was knock on the Googles because they have stuff like this for very, very specific tasks. And what we found is let's see, let's find the article I was reading about earlier tonight. Basically here, he says basically essentially the same thing. This is from an obviously third-party source, so we're not looking at Epic's propaganda by the lead network engineer in the very specific part of the company. It's kind of weird, guys. Like I mentioned before, I mentioned yesterday, Fortnite has grown immensely, and I think it's kind of outstripped the engine, meaning the engine and the staff aren't keeping up with basically the needs of the game. Where it used to be the game was like too small, like the engine was immense compared to the game. Now it seems like the game is pulling people on the engine, and it actually seems like the staffing for the engine is actually kind of what's holding back the game, because we still don't have things like HRTF. We don't have a lot of the improvements for audio that a game really, really needs. You don't have a lot of improvements for networking, which we're talking about right now, that the game really, really needs. Because I've had like one of the reasons I quit Fortnite was specifically because hit registration issues and low latency advantage, meaning if you have a low ping, that's the only way you basically get ahead is to have lower and lower ping, which basically brute force fixes the netcode. Which is one of the reasons that some streamers have just basically have a leg up on everyone because you have a 10 ms ping, and you basically just gut anyone that you run into. But in addition to that, I mean, they can even do things like adding like DirectX 12 support. They haven't even done that yet. Almost no games have that. There's some. They're starting to come into fruition, but even that, like I think the Unreal Engine supports it, but I'm not sure on that. Like they obviously don't support it enough where they actually put it into Fortnite because they're the same company. But the game, it does support it, just like they have a plugin for like True Audio, which is hardware accelerated sound channels for over OpenCL. So for GPUs can hardware accelerate sound, which is a good thing, because right now all it does is just clip the sounds. If there's too many sounds playing, it won't play certain sounds. That's the way it works. It'll just be priorities to sounds. That's generally the way it's worked for like the last decade, because you're limited basically by your CPU. And believe it or not, you can have more than enough sounds to saturate your CPU and just take up oodles of game time. CPU time. But anyways, we'll go over this. So he talks about different data applications that can negatively impact small amounts of packet loss. Impacted by small amount. We commented on the fact that data replication was significantly different than other data applications, that it could be negatively impacted by small amounts of packet loss. Today we'll talk about ways to overcome the impact of packet loss, talk about the impact of out-of-order packets has on goodput, which is their term for actual meaningful throughput, and return to the topic that we know is a hot issue for our readers: what functions should be done in a router. One of the key points here, the last 2 minutes, are packet loss affects throughput for any TCP stream. In particular, it affects throughput for high-speed streams, such as those associated with multimedia and data replication. As a result, numerous techniques such as forward error correction, which is one of the things we'll talk about, have been developed to mitigate the impact of packet loss. Basic premise of forward error correction is that additional error recovery packet is transmitted for every N packets that are sent. So basically, depending on how much error correction you want to have, depends on how much bigger you basically make your data stream. The additional packet potentially enables the network equipment at the receiving end to reconstitute the loss of packets and hence negates the actual packet loss. The ability of the equipment at the receiving end to reconstitute the lost packets depends on how many packets were lost and how many packets were transmitted. In the case of which one extra packet is carried for every 10 normal packets, 1 to 10 ratio, a 1% packet loss can be reduced to less than 0.09%. This is great. Once again, I'm saying packet loss, but you have to correlate that with out-of-order packets, which we'll talk about here in a second. This is great, but carrying extra packets if they're not needed is not a good idea. The extra packets are just needless overhead, which is true. But considering how little data gaming uses, this isn't really that big of a deal. Like gaming bandwidth is next to nothing, absolutely nothing. Like you can play it on the most shitty connection, and this is even something that you could just turn off. You could just have an option for users to turn this off for like a low bandwidth mode. If you have low bandwidth, you can turn off a feature like this, but they don't even have it. He doesn't even mention this. This is actually kind of like basic stuff. This is stuff you can find in Google, which is something that they have in place for other parts of the internet. But he doesn't even talk about like FEC, and I'm pretty sure they can implement it on UDP. It doesn't need to necessarily be something particular to TCP/IP. This is great, but carrying extra packets if they're not needed is not a good idea. Extra packets are needless overhead. As such, what we really need is adaptive FEC, where the amount of packets is carried. This is even further refined version of it, which whereby the amount of extra packets that is carried is changed dynamically based on the packet loss. So if you have a lot of packet loss, it'll send a higher level of error correction to help keep things in line, which is actually really, really fucking cool. Out-of-order packets do not tend to occur very often on hub and spoke networks and are more common on mesh networks, MPLS networks. If too many packets are received out of order, TCP will cause retransmission of packets similar to what happens with dropped packets. As such, the impact of out-of-order packets on good put is similar to the impact of packet loss. Essentially, he's saying out-of-order packets is basically the same thing as a packet loss, which is true, especially for real-time, like everything, real-time. I keep saying video, but that's not right. Real-time voice for VoIP, for instance, for VoIP or for gaming. Real-time VoIP means you can't have a big buffer and you can't suffer retransmission, so you can't wait for a packet to come back around. He talks about retransmitting packets here. This never happens. The only time this ever happens is with large amounts of packet loss, where basically the engine just kind of loses where the fuck it is, and it's just like, what am I supposed to do? And then it waits for the server to respond, which could be anything from, it could be anything from your roommate downloading too much porn and stuffing your connection so it can't receive packets in time, to someone down the street chopping a hole in the fiber line that's connected to your node. Like it could really be anything, and that's why the game engine needs to stop and take a breather and figure out what's going on, which requires a significant amount of time, and you really, really notice it as a user. Even with small amounts of packet loss, you'll just get the things where you like this, and then you'll run forward really fast, end up in a new position, stuff like that, or the game will play really fast as everything catches up. I'm sure you guys have seen that before, and that's common. That's packet loss. And reordered packets is like micro packet loss. It's not. I don't think micro packet loss is actually a term, but that's essentially this, because in this application for reordered packets, essentially the packets are just gotten rid of. They're just dropped. He doesn't mention it, but basically this is packet loss. Like I mentioned before, we're talking about people skirting responsibility and not really talking about things that actually matter because they either don't want to suffer the blowback or they don't want a bunch of armchair warriors on their ass. They'll thinly veil it, and they just won't really regard the subject. So maybe his higher ups don't really know what he's talking about, or might not actually know what's going on here. But basically, this is akin. What was currently happening in Fortnite was they just dumped the packet, which is packet loss, and now they're shifting to a buffer system, which means they're going to wait a certain amount of time to fill up this buffer, so then it can go in order in case something arrives late. But once again, even with a buffer, if something, let's say 16 ms, and you get one packet every millisecond, which I don't know the I don't think a packet is equivalent of a tick, so that doesn't really work. But let's say you have one packet per millisecond and you have 16 ms. So basically, it can wait up to 16 packets in length to reorder things, which obviously moves up. That's what's a good word for that? Retroactive, where the queue keeps moving up. It doesn't just sit at 1. You know, obviously the 1 through 16, the buffer keeps moving through the packets as they constantly filter through this buffer. So basically, they're going to use a buffer, but even that, if there's a packet that's too far out of sync with the buffer, it's going to drop it again. Once again, you're going to have packet loss. So like if we look at something specifically like this, they've already designed things in place to help handle things like this, which is an error correction bit or an error correction packet they can send with the normal load that will help verify the transmission. It's actually kind of weird that this guy's a network engineer, and this is something like I am like a decade out of date on, and I can immediately find a useful application of things that already exist, but he's not really talking about. Like, he's just basically talking about retransmission, which is TCP/IP, and then he starts talking about using a buffer, which is also a logical solution. But like when you talk about video games, that's a big no-no. You don't want buffering like at all. But anyways, we're talking about multiple different things here, guys. There needs to be metrics in place to measure out-of-order packets, the impact of out-of-order packets on your gameplay, which is basically essentially packet loss. So you can figure out whether or not you have a really bad connection or a good connection, because that's like latency. That's something you need to know. You need to know if your connection's falling apart. You know, that's like where, like, just kind of the, like at the most extreme end, they just kind of completely remove network latency indicators at a certain point in gaming, and then like they replace them a little bit with those red-green bars, which tells you nothing about what's going on. And in PC gaming, generally, they've went back to showing you ping times. But even that, like Fortnite, is extremely difficult to actually notice. Like, it's extremely difficult to find out your real ping, because it's not. It can be off depending on when the game's happening, or the FPS on your screen. It can be off by quite a bit. But anyways, article written 2008. This is old shit, guys. A lot of stuff in like networking this is like part of the internet that's been there forever. A few weeks ago, we published such impact of out-of-order packets on good put is similar to the impact of packet loss. A few weeks ago, we published a couple of columns on whether or not WAN optimization should be integrated into the router. The response to those newsletters is quite spirited, indicating this is an important topic for our readers. Mainly because, like I mentioned, one of the most anal groups of IT is networking, specifically telecom, is the most anal group of people I have ever encountered when it comes to fixing anything that I've ever seen. They're like super overprotective of their job. They like to they're like programmers on crack. They like to make their position seem a lot more important than it really is, and make it seem like almost no one can do it, and then they try to overcomplicate it so you won't really understand what they're talking about. It's actually kind of ridiculous. Having dealt with them, it's pretty big. Wrong wording there. They're very anal. Let's just keep analing them. In terms of what functionality should be performed in the router, we believe that you should look at it on a case-by-case basis. For example, packet reordering and FEC can both be performed in either the router or in a separate appliance. If the network is supporting just typical data applications, either approach will work. They can do this in software. However, the routers are designed to support typical data applications, and part of their design is to have the buffers that fill up when a lot of data is being sent. This is made specifically for TCP/IP, and could be something very specific as far as current implementation goes. But something like this is documented and is something that can be done. Like, this isn't this is, I guess, rocket science, but Telcom would tell you otherwise. Like, error correction is something that's in memory. If you guys ECC memory, right? You have an error correction bit in there just to make sure your data that's going through your memory doesn't become corrupted, which is important on a server level, because you don't want your databases to become randomly corrupted by erroneous data that might be going through your memory. Routers are designed to support typical data applications, and part of their design is to have buffers that fill up when a lot of data is being sent and then drain as either less data is transmitted or the TCP session ends. And this is a problem with buffer bloat, by the way, which adds basically tax on input, like tax on latency. As such, it is likely that the router's buffers will not have the opportunity to drain, hence packet reordering and the FEC are the best implemented in a separate appliance. Basically, they're saying a buffer kind of does the same thing as this does, but the benefit of FEC is the fact that it's basically real time. Is you can basically add a packet that helps you determine what a packet, like it can recover from a lost packet, or an out. In this case, once again, we were talking about how out of order packets are basically the same as a packet loss. If there is an out of order packet, it can recover from the packet loss / out of order packet without having to retransmit, and obviously without having to buffer, depending on how long it takes for that packet to get there, without having to buffer. Like, in general, FEC is just a really nice idea for something that's near real time, because it has to be as close to real time as possible, not waiting for buffers. Buffers are easy, you could buffer like a minute of gameplay, but that wouldn't make anything meaningful for the person that's still playing the game, right? If you're a minute behind everything, you're just basically dead. You're standing there. It's one of those things where you have a disconnect and you're like, oh no, and then you come back and you're dead, and you're like, shit, that's that kind of thing. As we pointed out in the first of these newsletters, in a data replication application, the data flow is constant and the session never terminates. This is basically a mirror case for gaming Orvo. As such, it is likely that the router's buffers will not have the opportunity to drain, hence packet reordering and the FCC best implemented in different appliances. We need to discuss this future newsletter and factors that impact plan good throughput. It was interesting read. FEC packet and wiki. Forward error correction or channel coding is a technique for controlling errors in data transmission over unreliable and noisy communication channels. We're once again equating out of order packets akin to packet loss, which is basically doesn't exist, so you have to make up for it. The central idea is the sender encodes the message in a redundant way by using error correction code. Been around forever. Redundancy allows the receiver to detect a limited number of errors that may occur anywhere in the message, and often to correct these errors without retransmission. FEC gives the receiver the ability to correct errors without needing a reverse channel to request retransmission of the data he was just talking about, or a networking engineer here was just talking about. But the cost is of a fixed high forward channel bandwidth. You could double the amount of bandwidth that gaming uses. You could literally retransmit a packet twice just to make sure that one packet is always there in order, which is another very brute force way of doing this, by the way, is just redundancy like RAID. So a RAID 1 array just duplicates all your data. You could literally send out 2 streams of data just to make sure both arrive on time and they're in the right order. Because if one arrives out of time, then you just use the other one. You use the other channel and vice versa. I mean, this isn't really that complicated, but instead they're resorting to things for buffers, which is a no-no for low latency applications. The cost of fixed channel. FEC is therefore applied to situations where retransmissions are costly or impossible, such as what we're describing right now, because it's a low latency application, which is what they weren't doing. They never retransmit unless you have massive packet losses, I described before. In gaming, you just don't retransmit ever. That's why they use UDP, as I mentioned. FEC is therefore applied in situations where retransmission is costly or impossible, such as one-way communication links and when transmitting through multiple receivers in multicast. So that's something, that's where you transmit to multiple devices at the same time. And you don't want to spam your network over and over again with the retransmission. For example, in the case of a satellite orbiting Uranus, I like facsimiles. Retransmission, because of decoding errors, can create a delay of 5 hours. FEC, so we're talking outer space here, and the amount of time it basically takes for radio transmissions to get to Uranus back to Earth. FEC information is usually added to mass storage, devices to recover of corrupted data, which we talked about. You can do something like that with a RAID array as the most basic level of implementing like that. Widely used in modems, is used on systems where primary memory is ECC memory, and broadcast situations where the cover does not have the capabilities of retransmission or would induce significant latency. Gaming latency. FEC processing in a receiver may be applied to a digital bit stream or in the demodulation of a digitally modulated carrier. For the latter, FEC is integral part of initial analog to digital conversion in the receiver. The maximum fraction of errors or of missing bits that can be corrected is determined by the design of the ECC, so the different forward error correcting codes are suitable for different conditions. In general, a stronger code induces more redundancy that needs to be transmitted using the available bandwidth, which reduces the effective bit rate when improving effective signal ratio. Basically, you just increase the amount of bandwidth you need. It increases the strength of the error correction, like we just here. This establishes bounds of the theoretical maximum information transfer rate of a channel with some given base noise level. His proof is not constructive and... Okay, I don't know where that came from. There's e-peen slapping happening at the end of this article. Talking shit at each other, guys. Anyways, so we're gonna go to the Twitters, and let's call out of order packets what they are. Packet loss. I'm just surprised that Epic at Fortnite, we'll take them all. And what's the guy's name? Followed. Ryan Gerlieve. Here. Yes. Doesn't use it. I thought it was the musician that didn't use it. David Ratty. That was the other guy. Ryan Gerlieve is that was the guy on the left side of the couch, I believe. Neither of these guys have Twitters? What? I mean, this was like 5 months ago, but maybe this means he still uses Twitter. Hasn't implemented a metric in this. They use the right effect, affect, effect. Effects completely affects the game. Please into error correction instead of buffering. As games are fancy found. I'm sure they know. Better solution. Let's call out of order packets what they are. Packet loss. I'm sort of surprised that Epic Games' Fortnite game hasn't implemented a metric for seeing it as it completely affects the game sim. As it. Like, I don't actually know how. I thought that guy used Twitter, and I guess he doesn't. Well, you wouldn't need, like, transmitting duplicate packets costs like nothing, depending on how much bandwidth you're using. So, like, because video games use so little bandwidth, you could basically triple like the network stream, triple it to the server, and depending on how it's implemented, I don't think you can cast something. I don't. That doesn't work. But I'm pretty sure there's a network way of duplicating a packet and sending it, which wouldn't incur like any sort of CPU overhead. So at the most brute force level, you could actually just like duplicate or triplicate your data. But you don't need to do that with something like error correction. This is kind of the shitty part, guys, because I have basically no followers and I have no, basically no influence on Twitter. Like if I make a post like this, it really doesn't matter because no one, the high probability that's not going to get seen. I want to tag the network engineer. Can't.
Emerging from the dust and rubble, we grow, turning with the tides of trouble. We know that's how it goes.
The game already does that when it orders the packets in the first place.
Don't be afraid if you fall from home. No need to worry, you are who you are. We fight to survive because we're warriors. Fighting to survive, we are warriors. We are warriors. Rushing as the moment's coming, we fall, standing up to keep on running. We know that's how it goes.
I'm pretty sure if I remember right, this has jitter too.
Don't be afraid if you fall from home. No need to worry, you are who you are. We fight to survive because we're warriors. Fighting to survive, we are warriors.
Doesn't have jitter. It has standard deviation, which is sort of like percentiles as well. Standard deviation is basically the spread. Consistency of the spread, I don't remember. how likely the spread actually represents average or the. China test fail. Free.
Let's light it up until our hearts catch fire. Then show the world a burning light that never shines so bright. We'll find a way, we'll find a way.
I don't know who to at this at. I could put it on Reddit, but if you put it on the normal Reddit, it doesn't really. People won't see it. Buried right away. We could put it on the BR or the competitive Reddit. That actually might. Competitive is a very, very vocal minority, so if you post something there that actually makes sense, sometimes it gains traction. Technical. Browsing the subreddit is the actual motivation killer. Cool. Fortnite is not a competitive game. That will generate no hate.
We'll never know what stands behind the door. But I got a feeling, it's a feeling that's worth dying for.
Post here from 20 hours ago.
Just close your eyes and hold your breath because it feels right. We'll keep it moving till we make it to the other side. And let's enjoy the ride. We're burning up. We might as well be lovers on the soul. We might as well be lovers on the soul. Let's light it up until our hearts catch fire. Then show the world a burning light that never shines
Good.
so bright.
Have to get the trophy somewhere, guys. Surprisingly, there's nothing on the competitive Reddit about out of order packets. Well, that's disappointing. I thought there'd actually be technical talk on here. It's basically just drama and competitive drama, like match drama, tournament drama. Oh, I guess we'll have to shoot it at Fortnite and Epic and hope for the best. Oh. There's an Unreal Engine. I've been taking Epic, and I should really be taking Unreal Engine. Oh, no. Oh, no. I've been taking Epic thinking it was their Unreal Engine. Oh, no. Like, when you take Epic, I think Epic is just, like, they're like the company, which basically amounts to nothing on Twitter. Like, that's just a company PR account. Oh, that's Fortnite game. Oh, no. Yeah, they don't actually have any... This is all just advertising. Oh, fuck me, guys. Fuck.
Get in your car, why don't you come with me in the night? Pick up the weight of your shoulders, it's just you and me tonight. And everything you say
Yeah, I've been taking the wrong...
when you close your eyes, you feel me.
Unreal Engine. There we go. This might actually have a meaningful... Might even get a retweet. Followers. $350,000 followers. What am I doing? I've always been taking Epic Games instead of Unreal Engine, guys. Oh no.
I'll breathe you in, keep you with me, 'cause you always give me life. And everything you say
They're actually pretty active on their account, too. Interesting. All this time, guys, all this time I've been taking the wrong part of the fucking body. Basically is what it amounts to here. I mean, we could even... I don't know if I can actually throw in... Weird with links. I don't know how to do the Twitter micro links. I think that's something... out of order packs, what they are. Paculos. We're surprised that Epic Games Unreal Engine hasn't implemented a metric for seeing this as a completely game sim. 240 characters, guys. Did you assume Epic Games has their own engine? Well, Epic Games is Unreal Engine. They make the Unreal Engine. So, yeah. They're the company that makes the Unreal Engine. Unreal Engine is Epic, and Epic is Unreal. Fortnite is basically a part of the Unreal Engine. by association, a different part of the company, but same thing. So the buffering is a better solution. Let's tweet this out. Good old 6 a.m. tweet while someone's sitting on the shitter manning the Twitter account. We'll get that in their mailbox. That might actually get a response. Now this, on the other hand, this account basically they don't use. Oh, I'm going to use a contact form here and of using your website for let's start with metric jitter. Okay. For real-time application, gaming, or functions like packet. Probably won't get a response. The way websites like this work is it's probably just a couple people, maybe 1 or 2 guys that basically do this website. Don't really have a real company. It's just posted out of someone's apartment or something. But you never know. Sometimes you get interesting responses, especially if no one contacts them, which I kind of doubt, because they're a benchmarking website for cloud servers, which does. Love your website for pinging cloud-hosted servers to get a general idea game depending on where. But get a general idea server depending on which web service use. Message was sent. Respond within 1 business day. Okay, I'll hold you to that. I'll hold you to that, Cloud Harmony. I better have a response by Tuesday. Not really, but, you know. It'd be nice. Okay, so this is an article in 2008, guys. But anyways, you can apply ECC to basically anything. So even though FEC might be built specifically for TCP/IP, you can use it for UDP. And one of the reasons that you'd use UDP over TCP/IP is because you want everything to be as close to real time as possible. So you want to basically have, you're not worried specifically about packet loss. Well, you're worried about packet loss, but out of order packets functions like packet loss. So you need to be able to reassemble the packet immediately that might be missing and fill in the blank, or not missing, out of order. It's going to appear sometime later in the chain. Assemble it immediately and then basically get the result for a packet that you don't have, obviously minus the ECC data that would come with it. RAID is cool, or not RAID. Yeah, well, RAID 5 is cool. Stuff that uses ECC is really cool. How they can basically use algorithm to put things back together, to piece it all back together. Depending on how many extra bits you're sending along with the packets, you can, assemble a much larger amount of packet loss, which is actually very cool. Like I mentioned, at the most basic level, if they wanted to fix out-of-order packets, they could largely just transmit 2 streams at the same time. And even then, I guess if 2 packets are sent at the same time, this is kind of like a RAID thing. Like if you build a RAID array with 2 drives, you want to make sure they're from different manufacturers, or don't buy them at the same time. Because if you buy them at the same time in the same, well, you can buy them from a different menu, different retailer, but you don't want them produced at the same time because they'll usually have a higher chance of failing at the same time as each other. But anyways, this is kind of the same thing. So if you have 2 packets sent out at exactly the same time, even though they're 2 separate packets, roughly the same time, they wouldn't be identical. Two separate packets, or just a larger, can't do a larger packet. 2 separate packets at the same time as a redundant packet. If one shows up and shows up late, there's a high chance that the one right after it will also show up late, simply because of whatever is holding that one up will probably hold up the one behind it. So it ends up kind of like snowballing. Kind of snowballs. But if you have something like error correction, basically it's like paying it forward, where your error correction is built into preceding packets. That's basically like buffering. Just thinking about that now. Depends on how far forward they've actually put into the chain. I was thinking about that. It's like paying it forward, which means it's like buffering only on the sending end instead of the receiving end. Whoops. This might just go back to like the RAID idea. In order for the sending end to know what's in the 10th packet, for instance, to add error check bits. Maybe it's the opposite direction. Maybe it's after it. It has to know what that is, so it can add error correction. It'd still be faster than a retransmit. It'd definitely still be faster than retransmit, but it might not be faster than buffering in the first place, and it'd be less complicated just to buffer. But then at the same time, you have packet loss protection. So, like, it's a buffer would just reorder packets, but error correction would also take into account packet loss and packet corruption. So that's 2 things that buffer wouldn't help with. But I mean, it's just kind of better in general, but I still think, I'm pretty sure you still have to use a buffer with actually, I don't know. Like in a RAID array, for instance, ECC data is attached to the stripes. Well, I don't think ECC over networking like attaches it to multiple packets for another packet, like the same way that RAID. I was thinking about like FEC functioning like RAID data, and it might not function that way. It might be paying it backwards, but the buffer is on the sending side. So the next packet that shows up might have the data for the packet before it. So it'd still be better than using a buffer. It'll be better than using a buffer. Multiple ways it would be better than using a buffer. But it still doesn't eliminate basically buffering in general. Oh yeah. variance is what I was looking at. I was thinking about standard deviation variance. That's what I was thinking of. The weird thing about this, guys, is like there's IPv6 that's always available, but even if you use IPv6, like you still, like I've tried using IPv6 when I was playing Fortnite and the servers didn't respond to it. Like you can't just go all IPv6 and play games. I've tried it. And it's just like you can't contact the servers. Like still stuff on the internet is not made for IPv6, so even if you try to use it, it doesn't work. And even when sometimes when you just have it on, like it fucks things up, which is why I don't have it on. I experimented with IPv6 every couple years. Last year I turned it on for a bit. Like a week. Okay. Okay. Fast forward, guys. Let's cover the Reddits, and then let's actually play some games. I'm done talking about packets. Done talking about packets. Let's see what's going on in the Fortnite Reddits. They had an issue with Sprint by default, causing pause. Read this on Twitter. Stop sprinting. Cool. Doing zip lines for the development was the most unnecessary thing ever. Take it all away. The planes are gone. Heard sweats running in your lobbies. Try the new Stream Sniper rifle coming to a lobby near you. Double damage to players with TTV, TV, YT, or Twitch in their name. Triple damage to players wearing the Goldbound set. 0.5 damage. All the target has. It should be the opposite direction. It should be like if 10 kills, less kills the target. Essentially, the less kills the target has, the more damage it does. Complicated to understand, though. Reporting events since Rest Replay mode released last year. Here's Season 3 to 8 in 60 seconds. Still one of the coolest events simply because no one expected that. It's tough to top. Good. That's the great thing about having a hopping community, guys. They do shit like that. You don't take time to do yourself as a game company. Okay. Apex Legends. Let's look at the Reddits. A video card should arrive later today, by the way, so I can implement it. And you guys will be bathing in amazing video quality, which doesn't seem to matter because I don't play games anyways. I just sit here and talk, so. Wholesome. Weird. Apex Legends almost has as many subscribers as Fortnite? Wait. Apex Legends has 600,000 subscribers? Yeah. Just a heads up, I am deaf IRL, so I can't hear mic callouts. Sorry in advance. All good, man. Don't worry about it. Thanks for. Okay. Don't ban cheaters. Instead, discreetly blacklist them and make them play against each other. This has already been discussed before on other forums for cheat detection. Problem is false positives, and also there's no way knowing. They did this in Titanfall too. They used to do this in Titanfall to the cheaters. They'd all play against each other, but it'd tell you that you weren't legit, so people just make new accounts. Like, this is cool and everything to think about, but it honestly, there's no way to just, like, in a perfect world, maybe it would work, but you're not in a perfect world. This is like purgatory. It's the idea of purgatory. You guys like my Bloodhound works so much, I decided to make this one. I hope you like it. Desktop wallpaper. I'd be playing Bangalore. Okay. Don't split from your team, guys. What the fuck? I guess. Or Wraith. Or is this common for soldiers to keep a photo of loved ones under clear sweetheart grips on their pistol? Huh. Okay. You do you, boo-boo. Apex gets boring too quick. Unpopular opinion, Apex gets boring too quick. I guess. I don't know if he's trying to make it seem like 107 hours is a lot or a little for him to make that assumption. Either which are actually true. Not that Apex is gets boring quick, but rather if you play the game for an extended period of time, you still cannot have the opinion that Apex gets boring quick. You could have figured that out in the first 12 hours and still proceeded to play for 107 hours. A lacious statement made to just undermine his argument. Friend the door would free them. What? He has crushed as a death. Interesting. Huh. That might get abused. Rage mode activated. Someone plays Bloodhound? Oh no, it's Bangalore. Council. Council, guys. Yep. Welcome to council. You know, I'm not sure everyone knows you're cheating. Uh-huh. The hero confirmed. Another Mimi. Mega Gibraltar. Yeah, he takes up 4 spots. He's so big. Ah! It's a Mimi too. Okay. Alright guys, let's play some Apex. Let's actually play some games today. We'll play some games. We will see how our gameage goes. Okay. Might as well restart. Might as well. Wait for the login.